Police officers, what's the creepiest disappearance case you've ever been assigned to? Part 2. Content warning. These stories contain descriptions of tragedies involving the loss of life, the kidnapping of children, and domestic violence and homicide. Story 8. Late to the party, but here goes. Responding to a missing person report. Husband was the caller reporting his wife was missing. Wife had a debilitating condition and was bedridden for several months. Husband said he went to dinner across town and discovered wife was gone upon returning home. No sign of her in the house or in the area. No kids were living at home. Search and rescue came out and spent all night searching the area with no luck. Scent dogs didn't even find anything. The whole time I'm imagining we're going to be discussing this case sometime in the future on Forensic Files. It was an eerie feeling to be sitting with a man and talking to him while thinking he may have just killed his wife, but having to treat him like he was a concerned husband. Fast forward to the next day, and a neighbor found her about a block and a half away, tucked down behind their bushes in their yard. No foul play. Turns out something just happened and wandered away, but lost energy and collapsed in that yard. Sadly, she reported seeing the glowing sticks or the scent of dog collars walking nearby on the road, but nobody or none of the dogs came close enough in the yard to find her until that neighbor came out that next morning. Ugh, that poor scared woman. Story 9. I'm late to the party, but I'll answer. We get a call from a husband that his wife and mother-in-law have been missing for 3 days. Their 2 small children are with dad, and he claimed he didn't know what happened. The husband had a massive history of domestic violence with his first wife, and we were pretty concerned for the well-being of his wife and mother-in-law, especially since they vanished without packing and didn't take the kids. I show up at the house, and the husband just gives me the creeps. Just a really frickin' weird vibe, and every single hair on my body is standing up. I feel nothing but dread as I listen to him tell me that he has no idea where they went and couldn't explain why he waited 3 days to call the police, especially with 2 small kids at home. I couldn't find any trace of evidence, and I was really perplexed. Found out later the wife and her mom went across the U.S. border to go shopping, and they both got arrested for shoplifting and were spending a week in jail while waiting for trial since they were Canadians and a flight risk. It was hilariously awkward breaking the truth to him, but a huge relief. Well, this didn't go the way I expected. Sounds like Brooklyn Nine-Nine material. Well, I don't think we'll be getting a lot of stories with endings like this in this video, so enjoy the levity while you can, folks. Happy to hear that the story had, well, not a happy ending. I don't know, it doesn't seem like anyone was really great in this story, so, yeah. Story 10. I'm not a cop, but in my hometown near Savannah, Georgia, just a month or 2 ago, a 14-year-old girl was missing for 2 weeks before it was reported. One of the neighbors was concerned that she hadn't seen the girl in so long, and after a while the police figured it was the father and stepmother. They brought out the dogs and found a grave just off the property where the girl had been buried, and they ended up finding her brother, too, who had also been murdered by their father 2 years prior at the age of 14, who he said had moved out of state to live with their mother. Nobody ever questioned his disappearance, but the father and stepmother had apparently been abusive their whole lives and pretty much kept them locked up. I lived in Richmond Hill up until a year ago. My wife saw this when a friend posted it on Facebook. It's really heart-wrenching. From what I've been told, it's also getting people in Atlanta talking about potential homeschool reform so that homeschooled children can't just disappear like that. Don't know if anything's going to come from it, though. It always breaks my heart when a parent could possibly do that to their child. What kind of human could do something like that? Good on that neighbor for at least trying. I think a lot of us try to mind our own business to a little too extreme of an extent. Not saying the neighbor could have prevented this, but maybe if people knew there were more neighbors like this in the world, they would be less likely to try this kind of sick crap in the future. I don't know. Story 11. Not a cop, but I did my undergrad at a college in Vermont. In the winter, we would quite literally be snowed under. Over Christmas break, a sophomore went missing. He wasn't a close friend, but had a couple of classes together. It was a small liberal arts college in a small town, so everyone in the community was pretty freaked out. His phone and wallet were left in his room, so the theory was that he'd been abducted and maybe even killed. Campus got really scared for a few months. There were police everywhere, helicopters overhead, students marching through the snow in lines looking for a body. Finally, when the snow and ice thawed, they found his body in the creek. Police surmised he entered the water from the bridge in town, but no one knows if he jumped or was pushed. This one still haunts me. Similar story from my growing up in Russia. A big town had a university nearby as well. It seemed like every few years some kid got too drunk and stepped outside when it was too cold and died, often without much of their clothing. Story 12. Not a cop. My friend's dad had died from a diabetic coma, so his mom started dating again. She met this dude who was a crystal head, and she got into drugs with him. One night, while I was at my friend's house, she was out. She called him and said that the guy and his friends were trying to redirect the spirit of Stevie Ray Vaughan, and she freaked out and drove off. She didn't know where she was, but she wanted him to know that something happened to her or was the guy she was dating. Well, a day or so later, after she had not come home, the police found her truck with all her stuff strewn about in a field. No one could find her. I think 6 or so months later, a hunter about 100 yards or so in the woods found a jawbone and DNA proved it was her. The authorities think that she had a psychotic episode because of the crystal freakout, ran into the woods and fell and died and was taken by animals. Very traumatic. Folks, I know some of you will experiment with illicit substances no matter what I say, but if you do, some of them are never, ever going to end well. YouTube gets mad if I say their names, but look, never mess with Breaking Bad or Train Spotting stuff, okay? That crap isn't risk-reward because it isn't a risk. Bad crap will happen, and it is never worth it. I've seen folks go down those roads, and the best possible outcome is eventual recovery, which isn't easy. Story 13. In the town I grew up in UK, a woman in her 30s, her 3 kids, and their car all went missing. Her husband was known for being a bit of a lad, and the immediate presumption was she'd had enough and left him, but her parents hadn't heard from her. Her bank account wasn't used, etc. But it was nearly a week before anybody seemed to get really worried about it. She'd picked the kids up from school, and they never went home, even though it was only a 10-minute journey. Eventually, one of the 10-year-old son's friends mentioned that he was planning on trying to get his mom to go and get them a McFlurry. The nearest McDonald's was a town away. They eventually realized that instead of going straight home, she'd agreed to drive to the McDonald's and gone back that way, part of which is along what we call the 40-foot, basically a massive dike. Found them all still strapped into the car at the bottom. Husband was engaged again, and his fiancée became pregnant within a year. Story 14. Dealt several times with a young mother who would always go missing for a few days and leave her child with relatives. Several missing persons reported over time. Turns out she was shacking up with her PCP-dealing boyfriend in a nearby city. One day, the lady walks in and says her daughter was kidnapped. I do some work and find that the aunt took the child because mom is just a terrible person. State did not want to get involved, so we have to give the kid back. I turn to my partner and tell him mom will definitely be dead within a few months. Probably turn up in a ditch or dumped in a river where she goes to visit her dealer boyfriend. Fast forward 3 months and I turn on the news to see the story of a woman found dumped in the river. It was mom. She was stabbed to death by her boyfriend and dumped in the river. That one creeped me out a bit. So, how do you enjoy being a psychic? That right there is the written definition of the phrase, I hate being right. Also, really sad that the state wouldn't do anything. I know that kind of stuff is complicated, but I don't think I could handle that. To be forced by the law to give a kid back to a parent like that, I would lose sleep. Just hearing about it is friggin' hard, but to have to be the person to make that happen? Nope, I couldn't. Story 15. My uncle went missing about 25 years ago in New Jersey. My dad has been so sad about it ever since, and this was before I was born. He had a history of mental illness, but the weird part is he has never been found. We don't know if he changed identities or got killed or went off his meds and went homeless, but it's been over 2 decades, and it still puzzled me to this day what happened to him. My dad even got Howard Stern one day to say live on air, Kevin Costello, if you're out there and listening to this, your brother is looking for you. I remember being a kid and listening to it on the radio. He just disappeared without a trace. It's so odd. My dad went through some of his belongings and has a trunk of some of his old stuff still in storage. Story 16. Not me personally, but other officers in my department. A 70-year-old female with dementia. Would often leave her home and go for walks around her property. One day she never came home, and it should be noted that we live on an island 30 miles out from the rest of the United States. State police, K-9s, our entire department, news helicopters, Coast Guard helicopters and boats, Marine Division, all searched land and ocean for this woman. We reviewed security footage at the airport and steamship ferry to see if she boarded either to leave the island, but she didn't. She was never found, and to this day, we don't know what happened. 2 theories have arrived, though. She walked right into the ocean and somehow her body disappeared and washed up, or 2, She walked into the construction site of a sewer plant and fell into a tank full of waste just before the tank was permanently covered. Story 17. One I worked on many moons ago. A Northwestern University medical student goes missing from her dorm. Everyone figures the boyfriend, a stockbroker, did it, but no body, no case. Times go by, stockbroker skips town to Thailand or the Philippines, yellow fever, missing student was Asian. Anyway, he runs out of money, so I contact her parents and say for 50 grand he will tell them where her body is. Parents agree, get his whereabouts to send the money, but frick that. Mom and dad hire a private investigator from Texas who has steel hooks for hands, give him the 50K and say, go get him. So, all hooks flies to Thailand/the Philippines, goes to the local cop shop, spends a bit more money and explains the circumstances. Cops roll this guy up, beat the utter crap out of him, and stick him on a non-stop to ORD. CPD are waiting at the gate. Good old hooks. I'm not saying that people should operate outside of the law to get justice for something like that, that the boyfriend deserved what happened to him, and that old Hooks was a hell of a guy for making that happen. I would never say that. But I wouldn't say I'm against it either. Story 18. Years ago, a girl, 10 to 12 years old, went missing in Arizona. It was so mainstream that 1 out of 10 cars had some signage and almost all businesses did. Years after the disappearance, a man in prison let a CO know he had some information. Guy is an enforcer. Causes pain or death when you do not pay. He wants to trade. The deal? You tell us everything, bad acts and all, and we will trade those for your information. This guy has to admit to several murders he committed but was never implicated with. He knew where her body was. They take him out wearing protective gear and find the spot. To no avail, it appears the body was moved. He also let them know that Dad has a large drug debt and he sold his daughter for a snuff film to repay it. Story 19. Not a cop, but the disappearance of Lauren Spearer is still unsolved and creepy to me. Lauren was drinking with several friends. Her boyfriend, Jesse Wolf, said he did not go out with Lauren or her friends that evening. He said he was texting back and forth with Spearer before he went to bed. According to witnesses, she was very intoxicated. There isn't much of a timeline of her disappearance other than some video surveillance and her friends' stories about that night. This took place in a college town, Bloomington, Indiana, and is still unsolved. Some people think it was a intercourse trafficking thing, others think she OD'd and her friends got rid of her to cover it up. If you Google her name, more on the case will pop up. Story 20. Not a cop, but had a pretty fricked up disappearance happen about a mile away from where I live. A girl went missing. She was 12. The whole town, state police, and I believe possibly the FBI all got involved. Search parties in the woods and through the streets for about 2 or 3 days. Turns out she had gone over to this kid's house that she knew from school to have them fix her bike. Turns out the kids, brothers, one 15 and the other 17, planned on stealing it. Well, she put up a struggle, and the one brother wound up strangling her in her basement. She was found a few days after she went missing. They stuffed her body in a trash can on trash night. The world can be a real crappy place sometimes, folks. These last few stories were a little much, so, hey, do me a favor and tell some folks important to you that you love them tonight, huh? Story 21. Brandon Lawson. He ran out of gas on the highway in the middle of the night and called his brother to come help him. Shortly after, he called 911 and reported that someone had chased him into the woods and that he needed police. Eventually, his brother and one police officer arrived at the scene and find his truck abandoned, but no sign of Brandon. Brandon called his brother and says he's bleeding and is 10 minutes away from his truck. That was the last anyone ever heard from him, and searches of the area turned up empty. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.